Can you paint me a picture of what it would have been like to be one of David's sons at this point in history?
I think the best word is probably dangerous. There's something about this story that right away just doesn't belong.
People write things with agendas and with intentions in mind.
Are you ready for it? Are you ready for it, Jackson? Solomon was not actually the son of David.
Welcome back to Truth and Tradition. In today's episode, I'm sitting down with Kipp Davis, a professor, YouTuber, and renowned Dead Sea Scrolls scholar. We are diving deep into a fascinating topic: political propaganda in the Bible. This conversation picks right up where we left off, and it's all about the dramatic, twisted tale of Judah and Tamar in Genesis chapter 38. This tale is intriguingly tied to the power struggle leading up to Solomon's coronation as king of Israel, despite the fact that Solomon was David's 10th son. That's all my fingers. His rise to the throne is anything but straightforward, and certainly not for the faint of heart. Now, this is part 2 of the series, and to really get the most out of this episode, you'll want to watch the first episode. It sets the stage and breaks down these incredible narratives that fuel today's discussion. So go on, watch that video, and once you've done that, grab a seat, because things are about to get wild. Dr. Kipp Davis, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Jackson. It's nice to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, I'm glad you were able to make it. I've seen some of your content on YouTube, and I think it's just really solid stuff. And it's really great to have just an expert just on the podcast, and I can learn from you just about this very fascinating text that we got in front of us.
Well, thank you very much for that. But honestly, and one of the reasons why I was excited to come is in large part just because I am absolutely fascinated with these particular texts, this story. What on earth is going on in the house of David? What you know, and it raises questions of intertextuality and propaganda and all these things that I love in the first place.
Yeah. It really gives me kind of like Game of Thrones kind of vibe.
Oh, yeah, very much so.
As you're looking through all this, it's so crazy. And this is just a quick reminder for you folks who are maybe skipping ahead. If you have not seen the previous video, we are just going to be diving deep into these texts, which is the succession narrative of the Hebrew Bible, as well as Genesis chapter 38, the story of Judah and Tamar. And so if you have not seen those, quickly check out that video, and then you can come here, and unless you're already a master of these texts, but I just think that will be very helpful beforehand. When I think about these texts, I think it points first and foremost to the sons of David. This is a very prominent aspect of this part of Scripture. And so can you paint me a picture of what it would have been like to be one of David's sons at this point in history?
Just in a word, I think the best word is probably dangerous. The one thing that I think we take away from this story, and I think this is probably going to be a learning experience full of a bunch of surprises for a lot of people as we talk through a little bit and we camp a little bit on this particular story of, you know, David's sons and their ambitions with regards to their father's legacy, with regards to the throne of his kingdom. So in a word, dangerous. And this is just part of the burden of being born into these positions of privilege within the ancient Near East. It was a cutthroat environment where power played the central role and infected family relationships on levels that most people just can't imagine. But Game of Thrones is certainly an apt analogy, I think, to draw when looking at what's happening in the court of the House of David.
So we're kind of seeing that it's dangerous at this point, especially for David's sons, the royal family. What are some of the things that point you to that conclusion?
One of the things that we have to look at right away, and just to give some background, if people haven't watched your last episode or are entering this story without much information or just from a sort of a Sunday school perspective of what this story is, after this is part of a larger cycle called the succession narrative, which appears starting in 2 Samuel chapter 11. This is the story of David's rape of Bathsheba and his murder of her husband Uriah. And so it starts there, and from that point all the way through to basically the end of 1 Kings chapter 2, where Solomon is finally installed as the king over all of Israel. This central theme seems to be the problems of David's sons, the problems they are creating for David in his household. Now, I think in many respects that's the strongly sanitized view that we see when we read this text, when we read these stories in our English Bibles without the benefit of knowing the original languages and without a strong sense of the cultural background to what happened in ancient Near Eastern royal circles in the question of succession when heredity played such a strong role. And not just that, too. There's one of the real keys to understanding these stories has to do with how the relationships of David's sons are construed to David himself. And it requires a really careful read of these things. Readers of these texts need to pay very close attention to who these guys were, not just sons of David, but how. How did they come into, like, whose children are they actually? Plays a substantial role, and under what circumstances were they were they born? And this plays a substantial role in understanding, what's really going on in the house of David.
Okay, yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense because David obviously had more than one wife, and he had there was political marriages. I believe his son Absalom was the product of a political marriage.
Yes, very importantly.
And so we see kind of maybe alliances that people would be drawing because of who's born to who and who is more related to who. So it might be helpful then to start. Could you maybe go through who are the people at play in this, in terms of David's sons, the different alliances that people have? Who's at play in this story?
The story of David and his rise to control the throne of Judah, the throne in Jerusalem, is part of this larger story of conflict with with what's presented as his predecessor. This is the first king of the so-called United Kingdom. And importantly, I'm of the opinion, as most scholars are, that the United Kingdom that was founded under Saul of Gibeah is a myth. There was no United Kingdom. I'm my tendency is to think that there is possibly some indicators that the house of Saul, this kingdom that David found himself, that this dynasty that David found himself in conflict with in these stories, maybe this was the much more powerful roots of the northern kingdom, the kingdom of Israel, the kingdom of Samaria, that we know from history, starting quite a bit later, in the 9th century with Omri, who was the father of the much more biblically famous Ahab. So importantly, we don't know much of anything about the rise of this kingdom prior to Omri, but maybe we've got some clues about it when we read these stories of David and Saul. Could it be that Saul was, a progenitor of this northern kingdom and was in conflict with David from the south? Now, that's a question I have. I don't have an answer for it, but the point I want to make is that that's sort of at the heart of this story, that this is a story predominantly about conflict and control in the house of David when confronting this other power, the house of Saul. So, and it's important to start. Go ahead.
Yeah, real quick. So, with people that might not be familiar with at least biblical literature, we're looking at, Israel, right? So, we have at least according to scripture, like the people of Israel who came from this person named Jacob, also known as Israel in the other tradition. And he had 12 sons who are the 12 tribes of Israel. And all the way through, we see kind of a through line of generation to generation to generation until we get to what you're referring to, which is this person named Saul, who comes from the lineage or the tribe of Benjamin, one of the 12 sons of Israel. And so he becomes king over supposedly the united people. And then David sort of comes in and becomes the next king after that. Then his son, Solomon, becomes king. And after the third king, this is what you're referring to, which is we see a split in the nation. So there's the northern kingdom of Israel, and they would be what people might refer to as the 10 lost tribes of Israel. Although, are they lost? There's a lot of speculation there, and you'll probably get into some of this too. But and then we have the other kingdom, which is the southern kingdom of Judah. And so what you're saying, though, is that this northern kingdom, that Saul wasn't in charge of a united kingdom, but he was in charge of just the northern kingdom, and David was maybe trying to establish his own kingdom, or were they already separate? I guess, what are you referring to here?
I think, and that's a question that I'm currently raising myself, right? Is how do we understand the dynamics of the establishment of these two kingdoms? Was there, and how far back can we even take some of this stuff? I'm toying with this idea that the House of Saul was sort of the origins of this. Maybe there was only one kingdom in the region that identified themselves with what we now consider to be Israelite culture and heritage. The House of David, which is what the southern kingdom in Jerusalem becomes, maybe it was born out of this conflict and this competition with the much more powerful, much more well-established group in the north, and maybe it put a scare in the strength of this northern kingdom. So these are all still ideas that I'm toying with, and I could be totally wrong about this. It could be that the Saulites were always just concentrated and centered in this southern kingdom, in and around what came to be the kingdom of David in Jerusalem, but which were then polemicized as northerners, just because, that seems to be one of the things that the biblical writers want to do, is to legitimate the primacy of Jerusalem by denigrating the northern kingdom. So, I mean, there's a number of ways to enter this question from an historical perspective, and I don't have good answers. I'm just, when it comes to that kind of stuff, I'm just really curious, and I'm still asking questions.
Yeah.
That's
and
probably
I think
not very satisfying, but that's...
Well, I mean, that's kind of the point of this channel, if I'm being honest. Like,
Awesome.
we aren't here to, just come up with an answer and be like, oh, okay, cool, we're all done. No. Like, that's not what truth seeking is. Truth seeking is asking questions, digging in deep, and constantly finding more questions, So I think that's awesome. And just as a way to maybe just remind the audience of what this conversation's all about. For a lot of you out there, you might be saying, well, that's not what the text says. Like, literally, like when we look at the text historically, like that's not what it's saying. I think it's important to realize that people write things with agendas and with intentions in mind. And you can stick with, the Bible's inerrant and that this is strictly historical. But I think a better word of understanding Scripture that I just learned today is don't listen to it literally, but think of it in terms of literarily. So like in terms of its literature. And so I thought that was maybe a good way. And so as we kind of dig into
Brilliant.
this, I encourage you guys, like, think of this literarily, not literally, but literarily in terms of the literature and what's actually trying to be portrayed and explained. So
it's a very good word. And I just like to say I'm happy to see that I have come to the right place. Because these are questions that this is what I love to do. I love to explore the Bible deeply, and honestly, and from an historic literary perspective. So let's start by talking about the players in this story, the characters.
Let's do it.
The sons of David. We're told there's a list given in 1 Samuel chapter 3, and we're told of 10 children that David had while he was still living at Hebron, because David's kingdom began, importantly, not in Jerusalem, but in Hebron. We're told that while he was still there, before moving his house to Jerusalem, he had 6 sons. His firstborn was Amnon, his natural successor, and he was the son of David's first wife, a woman by the name of Ahinoam, who had previously, and this is really important, Ahinoam had previously been a woman in the harem of Saul. Now, why is this important? And this is going to be a theme that we continue to see repeated as we go through this. So one of the ways in which, in this world, in this ancient Near Eastern world of royal power, one of the ways in which you assert your authority and you assert your own legitimacy as a ruler is through basically the invasion and conquest of another man's property and his own household. So when David either takes or is given, the text itself is not clear, but I think we have good reason to think the former. When he takes a woman from the harem of Saul and sleeps with her, this is why. This is the entire point. David is staking his claim as the legitimate ruler by taking one of Saul's women and having a child through her. We'll also come to discover this is potentially something that can become problematic and cuts both ways. Because invariably what happens every time a man asserts this kind of power and authority, he's also creating, as much as he's establishing or demonstrating his right to rule and his power over his rival. It does also give some power to the rival in the form of whatever familial relations his offspring might deem to be more important. As a son of both David and a member of Saul's harem, there's a risk here. Amnon, is he more David or is he more Saulite? And at this point in the story, we just don't know. He was the first. David had a son by another woman, the wealthy woman Abigail of Carmel. This is said to be located near Hebron. Interestingly, it's the same name also of an important region in the northern kingdom, quite far north. There is a mountain called Carmel, where most famously the prophet Elijah has a showdown with the prophets of Baal in Ahab's kingdom. Her son is named either Chileab, that's in 1 Samuel chapter 3, verse 2. It could be Daluiah, which is the Septuagint. This is the Greek translation of the word, or Daniel in 1 Chronicles chapter 3, 1. Now, I mentioned that just to kind of give a feel for some of the uncertainty I think we should carry with us when approaching some of these texts, because there's clearly some peculiar differences between the ways in which some of these traditions and some of these relationships are preserved. Importantly, Abigail was the former woman or wife of the Calebite chief called Nabal. Now, anyone who knows Hebrew right now is laughing, because this is an obvious derogatory smear on the part of the writer. Do you know what the name Nabal means?
I do not, no.
The name means stupid. Quite literally. Nabal, this isn't a name that his parents gave to him.
Unless they're cruel, I don't know.
I guess that's possible, but it seems unlikely to me. So what do we know of Nabal? We'll just settle on this a little bit. Nabal's holdings were immense. He was a very wealthy man. The text says in 1 Samuel chapter 25, the man was exceptionally great, having 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats. Now, as was customary in the ancient Near East, David's own ambitions to rule, as I mentioned, were secured by these sorts of conquests, by claiming the woman of powerful rivals. Saul, the former king of the north, and his unnamed but obviously powered chieftain in Judah. David was also brazenly asserting his own ownership of control of these houses. He's staking claims to whatever is Saul's, and he's staking claims to whatever is Nabal's. These are power players in the region, and this is part of David's war with them. So those are the first two. David's third son was Absalom. We've already mentioned this. He was the daughter of a woman named Maacah, who was herself a daughter of a king in the northern part of the Transjordan. Now, you pointed this out, that this is unlike the first two couplings of David with the woman from Saul's harem, and with the woman of the very wealthy Calebite, the stupid man. Unlike those first two couplings, this appears to be a royal marriage, an alliance, an equitable alliance between two rulers who both benefited from a political arrangement by betrothal. So that's where Absalom came from. David's fourth son was Adonijah. He's the son of a woman named Haggith. He is significantly only one of two of David's named sons to have a Yahwistic name, meaning Yahweh is my Lord. The remaining,
maybe explain real quick, what is Yahwistic? What do you mean by that?
So within ancient Israelite religion, we have very good reasons to think that they were worshippers of the God Yahweh, yes, but not exclusively so. They were Canaanites in terms of their ethnic distinction, but also religiously as well. So, and we see this in particular through the material culture, through the archaeological record. What the archaeology shows to us is that the people who lived in the region, the people who professed themselves to be, for all intents and purposes, Israelites, were not just worshiping Yahweh. They were also worshiping the high god El, whose name is actually ingrained into their self-identity. Yisrael, the strength of El, possibly, but less likely, the one who wrestled with El. So this is a polytheistic world. It's a world that is very much in tune with the rest of Canaanite culture and religion. So now, and if you read your text of the Bible really carefully, and if you're reading between the lines and understanding the culture a little bit, you can see echoes of this within the text itself. And I think this is one of the things that we see is that there is an element of a sort of exclusive commitment to the God Yahweh that is starting to emerge in the formation of a number of these texts. But interestingly, within something like David's kingdom, they're not all just worshiping Yahwists. Some of them are, but maybe not all of them. So Adonijah, he's the only one of the other one is a man by the name of Shephatiah. Also has a Yahwistic name, meaning Yahweh is my judge. But he's like an unimportant character. He's mentioned once and then never again. Adonijah is one of these two sons out of the 10 children that David had who have Yahwistic names.
And Yahwistic meaning they worship Yahweh.
Most likely, right?
Okay.
Or that's sort of the priority of the allegiance. That tends to be how we interpret and we understand these things. Because unfortunately, there's a lot of this stuff that writers and people who lived at the time just didn't leave us with tons of information. So now the rest of the children in David's family are not especially important. We'll get back to Tamar. We'll get to Tamar here in a minute, but the remaining two sons, Shephatiah, we've mentioned, and then Ithream, they're inconsequential. So 2 Samuel 5 tells us of more sons born to David by wives and concubines after the move to Jerusalem, but only Solomon, the son of Bathsheba, would factor into the succession narrative. Now, there are some questions as to Solomon's legitimacy, meaning we're not even sure from an historical perspective, even from the way these stories develop, if he was legitimately a son of David. And we're going to get to that. But
Wow. Okay.
right,
That's a
right,
surprise to me. Wow.
we're gonna get to this. For the narrators of both Second Samuel and First Chronicles, where these stories are told, the stories in First Chronicles are very different. So we're basically sticking with Second Samuel. Solomon's rightful succession hinges upon the claim that he is indeed a son of David, but we have to remember that this is propaganda. This is royal propaganda that's being written in this larger collection of literature that scholars will call the Deuteronomistic history, which basically tells a sanitized theological version of the history of the kings of Judah and the kings of Israel. So bearing in mind that this is propaganda, the strong assertion of the text to this point that Solomon is a legitimate son of David should be taken as an indication that there were at least ongoing doubts about the truth of this claim. What I mean by that is that the strong assertion of the text to this point could indicate almost, this expression of Shakespeare's. I believe it's in Hamlet. I'm not entirely sure. The lady doth protest too much.
Oh,
You familiar with that expression?
I've heard.
So usually we say this when there's something that's asserted so strongly as a point to raise some questions. Really? Why do you have to make such a big deal about this? Could it be that maybe you're trying to cover for something else? That kind of seems to, it seems that this is maybe an open question as to the legitimacy of Solomon. So for the purposes of the succession narrative, which we're going to get into now, 4 of David's sons: Amnon, his firstborn; Absalom, his thirdborn; Adonijah, and Solomon. They all made plays for the house of David. They all engaged in attempts to secure the right to be the next king. So the first was by Amnon. He's David's firstborn, remember, and he is probably the designated heir as the firstborn. 2 Samuel 13 is where we find his story. First, he's said to have raped his half-sister, Tamar, a daughter of the king, and then rejected her. He says in 2 Samuel 13, verse 17, "Get this woman away from me and lock the door behind her." By the way, where I'm quoting the text, these are all my own translations, which makes this more fun. Tamar is
so
said,
cool that you can do that.
and if you or any of your viewers are interested in learning how to do this, I work with my good friend Dr. Joshua Bowen over at Digital Hammurabi, and we're regularly teaching courses in learning biblical Hebrew for what I think is a pretty affordable price.
Okay.
$250 for 10 lessons to get you started. Okay, so there's my plug. I'll carry on now. Amnon, he rapes his half-sister, and then he recoils from this, right? So who is Tamar? Tamar is said, she's the daughter of the king, right? She's the daughter of David. She's said to be the sister also of David's third-born son, Absalom, by the Geshurite princess, this woman, Ma'akah, with whom David made a political alliance, right? We're told in the text that Amnon is literally sick with love for her, is what the text says. Tamar is called beautiful, which is a sign. This is not just physical attractiveness, but within these texts, it's usually also a sign of fertility. To be crass, maybe. She's exceptionally ripe. I don't know. Tamar is also a virgin. In verse 3, it says, it was impossible in the eyes of Amnon to do anything to her. So he comes up with a plan. Amnon devises with one of his counselors a plan to entrap Tamar into sleeping with him. It's important here. Within the story, she protests, but she does not necessarily object to the potential of this union, but rather her problem is with the timing. And I'm just going to read the story here. This is my translation. So this is 2 Samuel chapter 13, verses 7 to 14 here. David sent to Tamar in the house, saying, please go to the house of Amnon, your brother, and make food for him, because Amnon says he's sick, and the only person he wants to see when he's sick is Tamar. So Tamar went to the house of Amnon, her brother. He was lying down. She took dough, kneaded it, and made cakes before his eyes. Then she boiled the cakes. She took the pan and set food before him, but he refused to eat. Amnon said, get out of here, every man here with me. And every man left his presence. Amnon then said to Tamar, bring the food into this dark corner, and let me eat from your hand. Now I'm going to stop there for a second and just point out that when he's saying this, when he says, let me eat from your hand, within Hebrew and within this ancient Near Eastern culture, there's some sexual innuendo at play here. There's sort of a polite way of saying here, let's get it on.
Yeah.
Let's have sex. So Tamar takes the cakes she made and she brought them to Amnon, and the text repeats itself here, in the dark corner. As she approached to feed him, he grasped her and said to her, come, sleep with me, my sister. He's being really overt now. She said to him, no, my brother, do not, and the Hebrew word here, it's a verb, it's ta'aneni. Do not violate me. Such a thing is not done in Israel. Now, I'm drawing attention to this word because this is a funny word in the Hebrew text. It's used in a number of different ways, but quite often with the sense of deflowering a virgin girl. Within the legal codes, it usually indicates that her value as a marriageable asset for her father has been diminished in this sense. She's been violated. She's been deflowered. So this is her objection here. Such a thing is not done in Israel, she says. What does she say next? She says, do not do this nibala. Does that sound familiar?
Stupid.
Don't do this stupid thing. Where shall I carry my disgrace? And you will be like what? One of the Nibalim, one of the stupid men in Israel. See now, speak to the king, for he will not hold me from you. But he was unwilling to listen to her voice. Amnon overpowered her, he violated her, and he slept with her. Now you see the literary connections there, right? You picked up on that right away. The way that this is kind of connecting back to and recalling foolish Nabal, the foolish man of Abigail who David overpowered to maintain control, right?
I'm curious if Amnon almost saw his younger brother as kind of Nabal, as kind of stupid. And so the fact that now Tamar's sort of like saying, you are Nabal, like it's maybe a double meaning also to it, to where it's you're part of this. Now you're making yourself like you're this part of this, family,
Boy,
the dark horse part of the
that's
family.
That's an interesting point, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. And I hadn't thought about that. Yeah. Neat. I like that. So what's the problem here? Amnon's shortcoming is his impatience, and this is what renders him an unsuitable heir. Tamar in this story is wise. Wise Tamar can see that he is first in succession, and she knows that his legitimacy as the next king would be secured through a sexual relationship with her, the virgin daughter, and the property of the king. So it's probably not by accident that she emphasizes the careless impetuousness of Amnon's choice, calling him a Nabal, calling him a stupid man, like the stupid Calebite man from Carmel, who once stood in the way of David's ambition. So she's almost kind of saying, don't be like that idiot from the north, right? Do this the right way. There's a way to do this, and this isn't it. But she's powerless. She's powerless to stop him. I've got a quote here. This is an interesting quotation from an Old Testament scholar by the name of Don C. Benjamin, reflecting on this story. This is what he says about it. He says that Amnon is tormented but impotent. He finds Tamar marvelous to admire but difficult to possess. Amnon is portrayed like the Pharaoh, who cannot have intercourse with Sarah in Genesis chapter 12, Abimelech, who cannot have intercourse with Rebekah in Genesis chapter 26, and David, who cannot have intercourse with Abishag in 1 Kings chapter 1. And we'll talk a little bit about her later on. So Amnon looks at Tamar but cannot hold her. Voyeurs cannot be kings because they are impotent. So Amnon overstepped. He made a mistake. He was acting on the impulse of his ambition. This is a power play, but it was dumb. It was stupid. Amnon's violated Tamar, but his violation becomes irreversible by refusing now to add her to his own household. In verse 15, it says this: Amnon hated her with great contempt. The hatred he harbored for her was even greater than the adoration he once had for her. Amnon said to her, "Stand up, get out." And this puts both David and Absalom. Remember, Absalom is the next. Well, we're ignoring the son of the stupid man. Right?
Yeah, we're ignoring this.
So we're just ignoring that guy. We've already established in this story that we don't like stupid people. So you'll remember the third born son of David, the third in the natural line of succession, Absalom, who is also the son of a political alliance. He's the son of a woman that David added to his household through a treaty with another king in the Transjordan. But that just means it's on the other side of the Jordan River, but it's also in the north. Which I think is kind of interesting. But this puts both David and Absalom in a terrible position because Absalom is also the full brother of Tamar. Tamar's violation has left her without worth, or at least with substantially reduced worth, and very importantly, without a child. The strength of Amnon's challenge to the throne is probably enhanced not just by taking a woman out of David's house, but also by not producing an heir through her. And the reason for that is this. Remember, I hinted to this earlier. Because Amnon is the son of a former woman from the harem of Saul, Amnon is also a threat to extending the line of David, especially now that David's daughter, Absalom's sister, will remain childless. So you see how that works? In some ways, is this I mean, I think that the message is clear here that Amnon's a fool, Amnon's stupid, Amnon's impotent, but I think from his perspective, he's probably doing something smart by ensuring, and I have no idea how, I mean, this is the writer, right? This is the writer imagining how these things happen. But, you know, he's probably thinking, I can get this done. I can secure my legacy by this by basically taking from the harem, or taking from the household, sorry, of David the king, asserting my power, but then also without the potential of an heir, I'm also kind of, or at least an heir through her, I'm also kind of securing my own safety, in a manner of speaking, by not providing a like a solide to in this union. You see how that kind of works? It's almost like it's a way of him thinking that he's doing something smart, but actually is not. It's hard to explain.
So with the solid aspect of all of this, you mentioned that he's trying to sort of secure himself in some sense.
Yes.
Would it have been maybe like, I guess, with the first two sons, since they were both marriages that were sort of from other kings, maybe they would have been seen as less legitimate as Absalom, who was more of the political marriage? Is that kind of what might have been going on? Or
so here's a better way of putting it. So Amnon is part of Saul's lineage. He's part of the Saulides. If he can secure the kingdom, that's good for the Saulides. They're happy about that. And if he can do so without producing an heir that still carries with it a connection to the house of David, that's even better. Sorry, that's more clear now, I think. So what he's doing
without an heir, it's better.
Without an heir that can be tied to the house of David.
It's basically like this idea that he wants to sort of make this power play, the show of dominance against David, but then he doesn't want an heir, because then that heir would have the same issue where he's both from the house of David and the house of Saul.
Yes.
Okay, and
so
he's the goal would be to have an heir for Saul.
Yes, so he's using Tamar to fulfill this part of the plan, right? I'm going to assert my dominance over the house of David. But then, the next part of the plan is just don't get her pregnant, and I'll look after that. I'll make sure that when the time comes, my heirs are not connected to the house of David.
I'm smiling because this just totally connects with Genesis 38.
Yeah.
Wow.
And we're gonna get there.
Yeah, we'll get there. I'm gonna put a pin here so you guys can remember. But wow.
So and just yes, okay, all right. So Absalom is obviously now drawn into this whole conflict, just because his sister is Tamar, and this is bad. His sister's been violated. This affects him quite a bit. So what does he do? He's now put in a position where I think he feels like he's got to mount his own challenge to Amnon's legitimacy. Amnon's made his play, and he's also got to resecure the honor of his own house. Absalom, unlike Amnon, is patient. He's not rash. Remember, Amnon's problem is that he can't keep his powder dry. Absalom can. Absalom waits for 2 years after Amnon's assault of Tamar, and then Absalom assassinates Amnon at a sheep-shearing festival in Baal Chazor. The next thing that Absalom does is he escapes to the kingdom of Geshur. This is the kingdom of his grandfather, the kingdom where his mother came from, the kingdom with whom David has an alliance. And this is smart because he's safe here. David has to negotiate with another ruler, with another rival, if he wants to do anything about what Absalom has done. So I think one of the messages throughout this story is that Amnon is stupid, but Absalom is smart. That's really a big part of what's going on here. And this works its way out in the ways in which Absalom carries himself in this intrigue. This is a safe place.
It's important to sort of depict Absalom as smart as opposed to his brothers, because this is a very pro-David narrative. Is that kind of what you're getting at?
I don't know. I mean, it's definitely a very pro-David narrative, and I think Absalom is viewed as far and away the better choice because he's not a Saulite than Amnon, right?
And he's not Nabal.
He's not Nabal. And that's, you know, that's kind of the way of emphasizing this is by pointing out that he's unlike stupid Amnon. Saul's smart, or Absalom is smart. Amnon undoubtedly continued to enjoy support for his claim to the throne, especially among Saulite loyalists to his mother. I'm going to read a little bit here from a book by Joel Baden. I don't know if you've read it, on David. It's an excellent book. We need not doubt that it was really Absalom who killed Amnon. As we have seen, he too had his reasons for wanting Amnon dead. But Joel Baden points out, Joel Baden is a professor of Bible at Yale, and he says here that David must have been involved as well. What seems most probable is that he and Absalom conspired to have Amnon killed. David could have played on Absalom's desire for the throne. He probably made a deal with Absalom. If Absalom had Amnon killed, David would promise Absalom the right to succeed him on the throne. Absalom, after all, was no descendant of Saul, but the product of a legitimate royal marriage between David and the daughter of the king of Geshur. Indeed, this was the first legitimate marriage David had participated in after Ahinoam and Abigail. It was the first marriage David entered into when he was a king. Absalom would have been, in David's mind, a legitimate and desirable successor. So,
wow.
Yeah.
That's cool. That's really interesting.
If Absalom was David's preferred heir, and with Amnon out of the way, what happened? As with his sister, Absalom is remembered as ridiculously good looking. Remember, one of the features of Tamar is that she's gorgeous. Same with Absalom. In 2 Samuel 14:25, it says there was not a man in all of Israel as attractive as Absalom, admired by many from the bottom of his foot to the crown of his head. There was no blemish on him. Absalom is also said to have been blessed with a full, thick head of hair.
Luscious locks.
Luscious locks. When he shaved his head, as he would shave every year because it was thick upon him, he would shave it and weigh the hair of his head 200 shekels by the weight of the king. That's verse 26. Now, I have no idea how much hair that is. It sounds like a lot, though. And every year, right? Every single year. And I think this has got to be a sign. It's little nuggets like this, right, that are clear signs that, come on, people, we're dealing with a lot of exaggeration in these texts. But the point here is to show that Absalom is a specimen. He's stunning. So it's not just an interesting narrative detail in the story. Now, Jackson, have you ever seen, there's a bunch of them that have been unearthed, ancient Mesopotamian engravings or carved images of great men, kings rulers, famous rulers from the distant past. And if you've seen any of these, you'll get a sense of what I'm talking about, because these icons of propaganda all feature these men with thick, long, and luxuriantly coiffed heads of hair. You familiar with what I'm talking about? You can see.
Yeah, I'm not, but I'm definitely going to
carvings.
be looking this
go,
up.
Go check out. Go look up images of some of these rulers, like Esarhaddon or Sennacherib. There's a couple of Nebuchadnezzar, but they're really poorly preserved. But you'll see what I'm getting at. These men are all portrayed with just luxurious, flowing, meticulously manicured locks of hair. So within this part of the world, a man's hair was an unmistakable sign of his virility and his strength. The message to the audience is unmistakable. If you're part of this culture and you're reading about Absalom, or you're hearing these stories about Absalom, or if you're there and you see Absalom and maybe he really is this kind of a guy, this is what you're thinking. Absalom is a specimen. He's a unit. He was born to rule. In short order, Absalom started to look the part. Chapter 15, verse 1 tells us that Absalom provided himself with a chariot, horses, and 50 men running before him. These are accessories of a powerful and a wealthy king. Absalom goes a step further and begins to play the role. Following this in verses 2 to 4, we read that Absalom would be up early and he would stand at arm's length by the entrance of the gate. This is the entrance of the king's gate, I would assume. And when any man would have a suit to bring to the king for adjudication, he would call over to him and say, "For what city do you hail?" And he would respond, "Your slave is from such and such a tribe of Israel." And Absalom would say to him, "See, your complaint is good and right, but there is no one here, no one to hear you from the king. Would that he would install me as judge in the land. Would that I were king." Absalom presumes the mantle of his father and goes to undermine David's capacity to govern, right?
Spreading those seeds of doubt.
That's right. Spread those seeds
there.
of doubt. He's a clever man. He's a smart man. He's a beautiful man, right?
He's a real player.
He really is. He knows how to get things done. And I'll say as an aside here, something else that commenters will often point to is this feature of him making for himself. It literally says he made for himself a chariot and had horses and 50 runners. This is the sort of thing that commenters will also point to this as almost a subtle polemic. We see this. The Pharaoh, the king of Egypt in the stories of the Exodus is featured as, having the chariots and the 50 runners. So people we don't like are like this as well. I think that's a bit of maybe there's a bit of shade there on Absalom, but I think the point by this writer, by this narrator, is more likely that this is just a sign of him, being kingly. But I personally think in this part of the story, the message is that Absalom, regardless of how you feel about this, is basically promoting himself as a king. He manages to win the support of the people, many of whom are probably not entirely enamored with the aggressive warmongering philanderer David. You'll have to remember, up to this point in the story, he's already gone through a pretty bloodthirsty, a pretty brutal civil war with the Saulites in order to become king. Yeah. That's resting in the minds of a lot of these people. Not everyone is thrilled with David, and he's now. I mentioned it briefly at the beginning. This is after his escapades with Bathsheba and with Uriah. Undoubtedly, if this is something that happened, people are not happy about these as features of their ruler.
Not to mention the fact that like David allowed his daughter to be raped.
A ploy, a pawn in this royal intrigue.
Because it's important too, because it mentions in the text that Amnon requested of David to send Tamar.
Right. You're right.
To him.
I skipped over that part, but you're absolutely right about that. David has sent her, has basically handed her over to Amnon. There's already strong feelings that Absalom is able to marshal in order to gain the support of the people. So what does he do next? He goes to stage a coup, and first he usurps David's old capital at Hebron. From there, he amasses enough support to drive David into exile. More and more people are coming to Absalom's side, and David sees this, and he's like, we got to get so I better not swear. He says, we got to get out of Dodge here. So David leaves. He leaves behind only 10 of his concubines from his harem, the priests, and the Ark of the Covenant. He takes the entire rest of his household, and he leaves the city. So right after this, Absalom enters Jerusalem, and he occupies the king's house. In a move similar to Amnon's own attempt to capture a woman from the king's house, Absalom likewise, and much more successfully, stakes his own claim to David's harem. On the advice of one of the king's most reliable counselors, and, importantly, grossly, weirdly, in full public view of the people.
Yeah, this is the part that like I'm like, oh my goodness, this is as far out as you can get.
the wild world of the ancient Near East, and the ways in which ancient people connected sex in ways that we no longer think it's healthy to power, right? Again, this contrast with Amnon. Do you remember what Amnon did? Amnon cowardly performed his treason in a dark corner. Remember that?
Oh,
Absalom's act of conquest is in front of all Israel. It literally says, in front of the sun. In chapter 12, verse... that's probably supposed to... I think I got the versification wrong there, but that's what the text says. Don Benjamin, the Old Testament scholar, has something to say about this as well. I'll just read this quote from him. So, his marriages, Absalom's marriages to these women, we call them marriages in the modern sense. This is not what these are. But these marriages also ratified, you remember how many of them there were? There's 10 of them. They ratified the 10 major covenants on which David built his state. The Ark of the Covenant is David's legal claim to the land of Israel, this utopian idea of a united kingdom. The 10 wives are his claim to its children. When Absalom enters the city, he publicly rapes David's wives to demonstrate that he is now the king of Israel, who will fulfill the terms of the covenants that the household of David has with their households. And let's step this back again into this Saul-eyed, David-eyed competition, right? When we're talking about these covenants with the northern kingdoms, what he's really getting at here is that this is how Absalom shows to the people of the north that those Saulites, those sympathizers to the house of Saul, who are most likely also, coming to the aid of Absalom, even though he killed Amnon, they hate David that much, right? So ultimately, Absalom's presumptuous coup is unsuccessful, and he's killed when he and his backers confront David's armies in the field of battle. In the aftermath, David is left in his declining years, straining to hold the fragile alliances of his idealized United Kingdom together. Amnon makes an attempt and just fails, right? It just does not happen. Absalom, what does he do? He amasses a following. He gains strong sympathy. He sets himself up in, David's really David's heritage in Hebron. He manages to drive the king out of the city and successfully takes control of his harem and the ark. So he is basically all the way there, except for this one thing. And this is one of the features in the stories of David that we're reminded of time and time again. And that's that he is a great warrior. He is a bloodthirsty, fierce opponent. He would kill you just as soon as look at you, so you better know what you're doing if you're going to cross swords with him. This is the one thing that Absalom lacks. Absalom cannot best his father in a fight, and this is his undoing. This brings us finally to 1 Kings chapter 1 and 2. So when David is now old and is no longer suited to rule, his remaining heir, Adonijah, his fourth son, remember, takes the initiative to replace his father. By this time, David has become impotent and frail. He cannot keep himself warm, is what the text says. And even when provided companionship with a beautiful young girl, he's incapable of arousal. 1 Kings chapter 1 verse 4 says, they found Abishag the Shunammite and brought her to the king. The girl was like Tamar. She was ravishingly beautiful, and she became the king's companion. The text literally says, and I translated it this way, literally, I'm being tongue-in-cheek here. This is literally what it says. She serviced the king, but he did not know her. That means he was unable to have any kind of sexual intercourse with her.
So that's like the same word as in like, Genesis when
yes
Adam knew
yes
Eve.
This is the common word used usually by the Yahwist writer, I believe, to indicate sexual intercourse. So under these circumstances, Adonijah is being proactive, like his half brother Amnon, Absalom, his half brother, before him. He also assumes the trappings of kingship. He provided himself with a chariot, horses, and 50 men running before him. That's 1 Kings verse 5. He also secured the loyalty of the Levites under the high priest Abiathar and the army under the command of David's most powerful warrior, Joab. He offered sacrifices at the celebration of his own inauguration. He set himself up basically as the king. And honestly, it's pragmatic. Like, he recognizes, as everyone at this point recognizes, that David is past his best before date. He's declining. He's no longer in a position or a condition to rule. So Adonijah looks around and says, well, I'm next. He's just doing what he thinks he should be doing. I think it's really important to emphasize that I feel like Adonijah gets an absolutely raw deal in all of this. Because seriously, he's the right son. He's the next in line. He's the oldest. He undergoes the right protocols in ensuring that his claim is a strong one, and he only does so after it's clear that David can't do the job anymore. In many respects, he's just being a good son. He's just being, I think he's just trying to do the right thing here. I honestly think that.
And it's also significant because you mentioned this. It's significant that he got both Joab and the Levites on his side.
Yes.
You know, this is like, these are major, you know, parts of this kingdom, and he got them on his side. So
this is
doing something right.
This is a serious challenge. Like it just it should have worked. And Adonijah probably would have pulled this off without incident had it not been. This is why he failed. Had it not been for the intervention of two shadowy members of David's inner circle, and that would be David's woman, one of the women in his harem, Bathsheba. You remember her? Bathsheba, and importantly, the prophet Nathan. Let's talk about Nathan a little bit, because he's an important character in this story, and there's a couple of things I think we need to notice about Nathan. So he behaves like a court prophet. That is, like, he's like a prophet who is attached. He's part of the administration of David. He's part of a group of advisors, giving him counsel on how he should behave as a king. But he only pops up in the text in a few important places. He also has a particular interest in the career of David's 10th son, way down the line here.
Yeah.
Solomon, by his 8th named woman, Bathsheba. There are 3 prominent stories told in the Deuteronomistic history, in this part of the stories of David, that feature the prophet Nathan. The first is in 2 Samuel 7, where Nathan delivers a promise of Yahweh to the king for his dynastic succession. He says that it's Nathan who delivers this news, right, to David in 2 Samuel chapter 7, where he tells him basically that Yahweh's pleased with you, and there's never going to be a time in the kingdom of Jerusalem, in the kingdom of Judah, where one of your family members is not ruling. This is the promise of Yahweh to David, and it's delivered by Nathan. The second appearance is when Bathsheba, the woman of Uriah, and we're going to talk about this story a little bit now. We're backtracking here to 2 Samuel chapter 11. Bathsheba is spotted by David, who takes her to his house, has sexual intercourse with her, and impregnates her. In the fallout, David attempts either to save his trusted warrior Uriah from shame, or to remove any implication of guilt from himself. Mm-hmm. The text's not entirely clear on that. You have to read into it a little bit. And he makes this ploy. He develops this ruse where he brings, in the middle of a battle, he brings Uriah back and says, "Here, you should go enjoy yourself, sleep with your wife before returning to the battle, because I'm so pleased with you and how things are going." Some commenters have even suggested that Uriah knows what has happened. He knows that David has raped his woman, and this is his protest, because he knows what David is trying to do. David moves to have Uriah killed in the heat of battle, and then after that, he adds Bathsheba to his harem. The cover-up appears to have gone off without a hitch, maybe. But then enter Nathan the prophet in 2 Samuel chapter 12, who delivers a brilliant and blistering oracle. "I am the one who delivered you from the hand of Saul. I gave you the house of your Lord. The women of your Lord were in your embrace. I gave you the house of Israel and Judah. If it was too little, I added to you twice as much. Why have you despised the word of Yahweh to do this evil in his eyes? You slaughtered Uriah the Hittite with the sword, and his woman you took for yourself for a woman. You murdered him with a sword of the sons of Ammon. So now the sword shall never turn aside from your house, because you despised me. You took the woman of Uriah the Hittite to be your own woman. This is when I teach through this stuff, and when I'm writing about this stuff in my book, like this appears in a chapter entitled Kings and Prophets. So this is calling back to a lot of stuff I've already written about what prophets did, who they were in the courts of the kings, right? This is it on display. This is Nathan coming in and going, "You done messed up."
He comes in, he makes his oracle, and drops the mic. Yep.
Drops a mic, and he tells a really neat story, right? As a way of showing the king just how stupid, just what a part of the Nibbalim David is.
Yeah, and I have to make this correlation because it might not get made later, but in the story with Judah and Tamar, we see a similar thing happening where Judah is outraged and angered by the fact that Tamar is now pregnant, basically.
Yes.
And so his reaction's like just outrage until Tamar reveals the fact that you were the one that impregnated me.
Exactly.
Like, boom.
Exactly.
Yeah, so we have a very similar correlation here.
That's an excellent point that you made here. But we have to talk about Solomon, because this is where this story comes full circle, right? We're calling back to the incident in chapters 11 and moving into chapters 12 as part of David's punishment from Yahweh. The unnamed son of Bathsheba, that Bathsheba delivers, dies. This part of the story ends with David again sleeping with Bathsheba and her delivery of a second son, whom she names Shlomo. We know him more commonly as Solomon. Do you know what his name means? It's interesting.
No, what does Shlomo mean?
It means replacement. And it was widely been assumed that this is with reference to the unnamed infant. Yeah. Solomon has replaced the product of David's overreach. It's interesting because in the same story, in verse 25, Nathan is said to have also named the child, and he calls him Yedidiah, beloved of Yahweh, which is a name that in Hebrew also sounds conspicuously similar to David. Yedidiah and David. I mean, there's some playing on of words here. I think it's interesting that Solomon has two names. We almost never hear this second name. Remember what I said about questions regarding Solomon's legitimacy? You know, what are
legitimacy as a son of David?
Yeah.
Not necessarily the next king that's there, but as a son of David.
Exactly. Okay. And this is the last time Nathan comes, he names the son, and poof, he's gone. Once more disappears from the succession narrative, and he's nowhere to be found in the stories of Amnon and Absalom, featuring David's struggle to report public confidence in his kingdom. There's no mention of him in a story of a devastating famine or the ongoing wars with the Philistines. But then in 1 Kings, Nathan reemerges in the story of Adonijah's bid for succession. So Nathan said to Bathsheba, the mother of Solomon, is what the text says, "Have you not heard that Adonijah, son of Haggith, became king, and our Lord David did not know it? So go, let me provide you with counsel, please, so that you can save your life and the life of your son Solomon. Go, enter into the king and say to him, did you, my lord, the king, not make a pledge to your slave, saying that Solomon your son will become king after me, and he will sit on my throne? So why has Adonijah become the king? Look, while you are still speaking there with the king," this is Nathan speaking, "I will then come in after you, and I will confirm your words." So Solomon's bid, there's now a conflict. There are now two challenges to the throne. There's Adonijah's, which totally seems 100% legitimate on the face of it. But now you've got this other bid because Nathan and Bathsheba have come in and they've persuaded the king based on this promise. This is the first time we've heard this promise, by the way. So who knows? Remember, David's incapacitated. Are they telling the truth? We don't know. Did they just make this up on the spot? We don't know. Solomon is the 10th in line to the throne. There's no good reason to think that David's particularly inclined to make him the king in the first place. This is fishy on the face of it. But this works. Solomon's bid is backed by the high priest Zadok, the sons of Aaron in Jerusalem, and a military faction under the leadership of one of David's warriors, Benaiah, son of Jehoiada. So Adonijah is forced to concede because his claim doesn't have the muscle behind it. And after the death of David, he makes one more attempt, Adonijah does, to reassert his royal claim by taking one of David's concubines, Abishag. This is the same gorgeous Shunammite who serviced David in his old age. Adonijah sees shrewdly that sexual union with the girl that the king was unable to impregnate will bolster his claim over that of Solomon's. But Solomon sees this too, and this is what he says. He says, "Why do you ask for Abishag the Shunammite for Adonijah? Ask for him the kingdom. He is my older brother, and Abiathar the priest and Joab son of Zeruiah are his." What's he saying here? He's saying Adonijah has this super strong legitimate claim to the throne. Why would I now give him the woman from my father's harem that my father was unable to impregnate?
Clearly, it's Solomon's a little afraid here, and he's,
totally. And we have to explore this question. We have to explore this. Why is Solomon so threatened by this? A reader is tempted to see this as a story of triumph for the house of David by ensuring the rightful succession of his preferred son, Solomon. Importantly, this is what we see because this is what the writer wants us to see. That's really important. We have to remember when we're reading these stories, when we're reading this propaganda, the writer is pulling the wool over our eyes and casting things in a way that we don't see clearly. We have to read these texts really carefully. This is politics. By all rights, Adonijah's legitimate succession appears to have been thwarted by a conspiracy. Nathan and Bathsheba promote Solomon by taking advantage of an old man in a weakened and a vulnerable state. But why? Bathsheba claims that her life and the life of Solomon are in danger. "As for you, my lord the king," she says, "the eyes of all Israel are on you to inform them who will sit on the throne of my lord the king after him. Otherwise, when my lord the king lies down with his fathers, then I and my son Solomon will become pariahs." She says that in 1 Kings 1:20-21. But is this a truthful claim? I think we have reasons to think otherwise. In a brilliant study of Solomon, a scholar by the name of Taylor Vayola has made a convincing case that this was the coup. Not Adonijah's. This was the coup. Because, are you ready for it? Are you ready for it, Jackson?
I am eager. Let's hear it.
Solomon was not actually the son of David. He was rather the son of Uriah. There was no unnamed son who died as punishment for David's crime. This was fiction invented by the writer to cover for the fact that Solomon was not his offspring after you who comes out of your belly. That's part of the promise of Nathan, remember, to David in 2 Samuel 7 verse 12. Solomon was the son of a foreigner, a Hittite, who was mourned by his widow after her rapist had murdered him in 1126. Solomon was not a replacement for the child unborn of sexual violence. He was the replacement for his cravenly betrayed father, Uriah. So I'm going to read. This is Viola. Everything looks entirely different if we completely disregard the death of the first child and simply recognize that Bathsheba gave him the name Solomon in memory of her recently deceased husband Uriah. For in this case, Bathsheba had every reason to name her firstborn son his replacement, namely the replacement of Uriah. The gravity of Bathsheba's situation lies in the fact that she, as a childless widow, was threatened with an extremely uncertain social situation. At this moment, it was especially lucky for her that she was expecting a child of the king, no less. This opened a most unusual opportunity to be saved from the penurious state of a widow.
Wow. Okay, so let me see if I fully understand what you're saying here. So you're saying that Solomon is this replacement of Bathsheba or Bathsheba's husband Uriah, and the replacement meaning Solomon's the son of Uriah.
Yes, I think so.
Okay,
that's
then,
Viola's argument, and I really like it.
So his argument, would that mean that Solomon then would have been older than the son born to David and Bathsheba that supposedly died? Or
well, there is no son of David and Bathsheba that supposedly died. Viola's point is that that's the cover up by the narrator of the story, that if we're reading this story carefully through the eyes of a propagandist, that's the propaganda, right? The propaganda is that Solomon's he really is actually a son of David, where and the way that he writes this in there is that the son that was produced by this illegitimate relationship between David and Bathsheba, this son actually died, and that was David's punishment. That's the propaganda. When in actual fact, the reason she names him Solomon is because she knows that he's not David's son. He's Uriah's son. Part of why Viola thinks that Solomon is Bathsheba's son by Uriah and not David has to do with this. So the story told by the Deuteronomists is to cover and promote the lie of Solomon's legitimacy and the unchecked longevity of the house of David. She turned the tables back on her assailant. When David was robbed of his strength, as he robbed her of her strength, his virility, his wits, she, with the aid of her only friend in court, Nathan the prophet, robbed him of his dynasty.
That's not where I thought you were going with it, too. Because in my mind, and this is a little bit more kind of schemy, but in my mind where I thought you were going to go was that Solomon is actually the son of Nathan and Bathsheba. And
Well, maybe it's that.
yeah.
I mean, they're buddies, right? They're really close.
Yeah, we only
That's
see
right.
Nathan
Yeah.
showing up in regards to to
I like
Solomon
it.
and
I like it,
Bathsheba.
Jackson. I'll allow it.
Yeah.
It's good. I don't know if I'm right, but I particularly like this reading of the story. The Bathsheba's revenge reading is definitely my favorite.
Oh yeah.
And in large part just because I just, the Bible gets a lot of legitimate flack for being for being a text that is used to disenfranchise women. So I really think we need to work, and we need to emphasize those moments when women triumph. And this is about as good as it gets.
And this, again, like, this has so many connotations theologically.
Yes.
Like, if Solomon isn't David's son, then Jesus is not a descendant of David, and all the prophecies are incorrect.
Well, there's a whole other direction that you could go with this. But let's talk about Genesis 38. So all of this is to show, like, in this story, like, this is to show that David's administration was a mess. But it's probably not unusual. I think we get a handful of stories from Mesopotamia and from Assyria and from Persia, which show us that this is just the way court life was. It's a mess that the Deuteronomist did his utmost to clean up through a lot of creative storytelling as he's telling these stories of David's succession. But if we accept that any of this intrigue has a grain of truth to it, then we should also be unsurprised that this precarious comedy of succession did not go unnoticed by David's many, many opponents. This text helps us to see, though, that there were fatal flaws in the kingdom of David, and that his tyrannical regime faced constant challenges from the family he usurped, the house of Saul, from inside his own house, from outside, from among those he violated and abused. Don't forget about the poor Calebite stupid man, right? Don't forget about this guy. So, as you've alluded to, as you've talked about in your last episode, and I'm finally getting to this, there is in the Bible another story of the succession of David, I'm convinced. But this one comes from the outside. It's much more understated than the Deuteronomist's royal propaganda. It's more satirical. It's more cynical. It employs subterfuge to conceal its characters, but only barely so. Anyone with a knowledge of who these people were would recognize them in this story. We don't, because we're a bunch of dummies who only read and speak English, right?
I thought that Moses wrote the book of Genesis. So it doesn't really make sense because Moses is supposed to be the author, and he was clearly way before this time. So what do you have to say about that?
I mean, I have to say that maybe some of your viewers and your listeners will be surprised, but I hate to break it to everyone that we know with a great amount of certainty that Moses did not write anything in the Torah, in the Pentateuch, period. There's just nothing there. This is literature that was written much later in time. I think some of it probably you can trace back early to, and I'm fairly conservative as a scholar in this regard, in the sense that I think there's texts, I think there's traditions within the Hebrew Bible that you probably can date as early as the 10th century, maybe even the 11th. I'm less committed to that, but that's all after any supposed Moses. And I think we need to understand what the literature of the Torah is. It's the product of these kingdoms that came later, the kingdoms in the north of Omri and maybe Saul, and then later on Ahab, the kingdom of Judah in the south, the house of David, the house of Hezekiah. We need to understand that the Torah, all the texts of the so-called five books of Moses, they're in this whole literary space as well. They come from here. I mean, a lot of scholars will tell you that lots of this stuff is even much later than that, and it is. But if you're gonna be a super conservative guy like me, and actually entertain the possibility that some of this stuff can date as far back as the 10th century, then you also have to recognize that that this is the world in which these texts were written, and these are the concerns that they're set to address.
Mm-hmm. And you've mentioned this word a lot, and I apologize that I haven't maybe asked a little bit about it. But the idea of the Deuteronomist.
Yeah, sorry about that.
That is a part of this idea of the author of the book of Deuteronomy, correct? And how that was crafted during the time of Josiah.
Yes. So the best way to understand this is that the book of Deuteronomy, or at least the earliest form, the earliest part of the book of Deuteronomy, probably dates to the time of Josiah, the king of Judah, in the 7th century BCE. And the book of Deuteronomy presents a pretty radical program of theological reform. When you compare it to earlier things like in the Covenant Code, in the book of Exodus. So this is a pretty dramatic, radical rewriting of the Constitution between the king and his people. And it sets a really strong focus on the centrality of Yahweh, the worship of Yahweh alone, and importantly, the worship of Yahweh only in one place, and that's the house of Yahweh, the temple in Jerusalem. So that's kind of the background there. But then this thing that I've been calling the Deuteronomistic history, this literature of the Deuteronomists, which appears in the books of Joshua, Judges, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, was written, I don't think necessarily by the same person who wrote, or the same people who wrote the book of Deuteronomy, but they sure loved them some Deuteronomy. They sure loved this Reformation document that accompanied Josiah's rule. And the Deuteronomist was writing this House of David centric propaganda, promoting a son of David, a member of the House of David, Josiah, in his commitment to Yahweh alone. And so you see many of these same themes popping up all the way throughout the Deuteronomistic history, which echo all the things you're reading in the book of Deuteronomy. So that's what's going on there.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's helpful. I was just curious, and it's interesting how you kind of see, like with everything here we're talking about, there's like camps. There's people that are like, I'm pro this, and so the fact that like the Deuteronomy, like the Deuteronomists, is kind of its own sort of like camp
it's its own camp. Exactly. Yeah. It's a text as we have it now, which was hundreds of years in the making. So, but let's talk about the other side of this. Let's talk about this other story, this parable in Genesis chapter 38. Genesis chapter 37 is the story of Joseph. Joseph's the jealousy of his brothers and his family, and his basic abduction and sale as a slave into the into Egypt. And after all that happens, it's like there's an interlude. It's like you can start the story with, meanwhile, back in Israel.
Yeah.
But it interrupts this narrative. And then once the story is concluded, then the rest of the story of Joseph carries on. So now that, I'll just say at the outset, is a clue. This is a clue to us as readers that there's something about this text, there's something about this story that right away just doesn't belong where it's placed. It's hammered into there. It does fit, albeit awkwardly. So, and the reason for that is because this story, in its original composition, was a completely different kind of story that had nothing to do with
nothing to do with Joseph,
nothing to do with Joseph or his brothers or
Jacob's
anything like that, right?
Yeah.
So this is let's fix on this and let's get into our heads that this is a story about the succession of David's sons, about the house of David. So it happened around that time that Judah moved away from his brothers. He moved away from his brothers. That's important. And he joined himself to an Adulamite. His name was Hira. Judah saw there the daughter of a Canaanite man. His name was Shua. He took her, and he went into her. She became pregnant, and she gave birth to a son. He called his name Er. Then she became pregnant again and gave birth to a son, and she called his name Onan. It happened again, and she gave birth to a son, and she called his name Shelah. It was in Keziv that she gave birth to him. So Judah took a woman for Er, his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. Her name was Tamar. Readers, listeners, will immediately recognize this name. It's the same name as that given to the daughter of David, the sister of Absalom, who was violated by David's firstborn son Amnon in a failed attempt to secure the throne of his father. I know, it must have just been a popular name, eh?
Yep.
No.
Only shows up 3 times in the Bible.
Yes. And that third time, that's in the New Testament, isn't it? Am I right about that?
No, it's
okay.
the son of Absalom, right?
Oh,
The
yes,
son of
you're right.
Absalom.
Yes,
Yeah.
correct. Sorry,
Or the daughter
the daughter of Absalom. That's right. I forgot about that. Wow.
Yeah.
So, and people listening, people watching, I just want to emphasize this point that when you're reading the Bible and you're encountering names, and there are a lot of them, and it's easy just to gloss over them, like all of these names are extremely important to what's going on in the stories that they tell. In particular, some of these much more strongly crafted mythical narratives like this one. Mm-hmm. So the astute reader, the astute listener, will also see other parallels in the names that appear in the story. First, we're told that Judah moved away from his brothers as if he's going out on his own. That's an interesting feature, eh? And then he allies himself with a man from the region of Adullam named Hira. Now, several of these names do not come through as well in the English translations, but this appears remarkably similar to another name that occasionally is mentioned in the Bible, and that's Hiram. Hiram was the king of the northern Phoenician city of Tyre, and he's credited in the Deuteronomistic history, in 2 Samuel, and in 1 Kings, providing materials and skilled craftsmen for the construction of the Jerusalem temple. Now, according to the tale in Genesis, this one that we just started reading, the kingdom of Judah under David, what does it say? It says it moved away from his brothers, and he joined himself to the Phoenician king Hiram. In the Genesis story, a Uriah is called an Adulamite. And this is also significant to the stories of David. When David was in open challenge to his predecessor Saul, we read in 1 Samuel chapter 22, verse 1, that he escaped to a cave in Adullam. His brothers and the entire house of his father listened, and they joined him there. So I think that's kind of interesting. And you've got this same sort of, you've got this sanitized idea from the Deuteronomistic history of what's going on, right? But I think you've got maybe a more raw, a more challenging idea, a more adversarial idea of what's going on here by pointing out, right? Judah left his brothers and went to Adullam and joined this fellow, this Hira. So, right away, the picture is painted that if this is a story about David, and if the representation here, as I will suggest, of Judah is basically code for the house of David, then what this text is pointing out at the outset is that David is acting against the interests of other people, against other challengers, other groups, other tribes.
The House of Saul, maybe?
The House of Saul, maybe others, right? The point here being made is that David's kind of doing his own thing, and maybe this isn't a good thing. There are other names in the Genesis tale which readily bring to mind the house of David, and we're going to look at these. First of all, Judah marries an unnamed Canaanite woman who is identified as the daughter of Shua. Do you know what this is in Hebrew, Jackson?
Bathsheba.
Correct. Literally, Bathsheba, which looks and sounds nearly identical to Bathsheba. As a matter of fact, Bathsheba is how the mother of Solomon is explicitly identified in the later alternative history of Judah written by the chronicler. That's in 1 Chronicles 3, verse 5. She's called Bathsheba. It's the exact same name as appears in Genesis 38.
And for those who are unfamiliar with what Bat and Shua mean, I had to look this up, but Bat, I believe, means daughter, like daughter of, and then Shua being the name of this person. So daughter of Shua, and Shua actually means wealth, I believe. So technically their name is daughter of wealth.
That's very good, yes.
Yeah. And so that's why it's significant, because we have a connection here between this daughter of Shua, Bathsheba, and we have a connection between that and what we would in English call Bathsheba or Bathsheba, and what you're saying here in Chronicles also calls her Bathsheba.
Yeah.
So it's a very interesting connection.
And I wonder if, part of maybe, and this is me just speculating, maybe the name change is part of the propagandistic program of the Deuteronomist, right?
Yeah.
This is just part of the cover that he's desperately trying to provide for this story he's telling, this sanitized story of the succession.
Or maybe the scribe for the chronicler just made a mistake. It was maybe a late night, and he was like, I wrote the wrong name. My bad.
Listen, that happens. That does happen. As someone who spends a lot of time looking at scribal practices and scribal mistakes, this isn't one that I'd necessarily expect if he was just tired and couldn't see what he was doing. But let's in any event, I think the important thing to notice here is that there is this very, very close correspondence between these two names, between these two characters, that ties them together in these stories, in the succession narrative and here in Genesis chapter 38. Next, Judah's firstborn son, his name is Er, which is an unusual name. Lexicographers, these are people who put together Hebrew dictionaries, or any dictionary, but Hebrew lexicographers put together Hebrew dictionaries. Commentators on this text continue to struggle a little bit with how even to understand this, because it's strange. It's a strange name to provide to someone. Now, it may be related to the Hebrew noun Ir, which is translated as city, but it's also like a reversal of the word Ra, which means bad or evil. As we shall see presently, Er, Judah's firstborn, the text tells us, was Ra. He was bad in the eyes of Yahweh, and Yahweh killed him. Now, Judah's second son is named Onan, which bears a striking resemblance to the name of David's firstborn son, Amnon. In fact, in Hebrew, you make the name Amnon just by inserting a single letter, a letter mem, into Onan. That's how you do it. Likewise, Judah's third son is named Shelah, which looks remarkably like the name of Bathsheba's son, Shlomo, or Solomon, also showing a difference of only a single letter and the same letter, a mem. All of these names, Hira for Hiram, Onan for Amnon, Shelah for Shlomo, the only change is made by adding the same letter, a mem.
Yeah.
I just don't think that's a coincidence. One final detail that we're provided about Judah's youngest son, Shelah, is this. I think this is interesting too. It says it was in Keziv that Bathsheba gave birth to him. That's Genesis 38:5. So, what? Is this a place? It's most often associated with the town of Achziv in Judah. We read about in Joshua 15:44 or Micah 1:14. But it seems not coincidental that the word Keziv is derived from a verb, which means to make a liar. Remember what I said about Solomon's illegitimacy? Was the writer nodding to the unspoken reality that Solomon was conceived in Keziv? Was he conceived in a lie?
Oh, wow.
Right?
Wow,
So-
okay.
That's kind of cool, eh?
Yeah, that's very interesting.
And these are the sorts of things that, and this is where it's just, guys, it is super, super fun having the opportunity to explore the texts in their original languages, because this is the kind of thing that you start to see, right? So, from the outset, our attention is drawn to this story in Genesis as a tale about the dynastic family of the kingdom of Judah. I hope everybody's on board with that at a minimum. This is a story about the house of David. There seems to be little beyond the correspondence of several names and key words that connects this story to the succession narrative. However, the two texts do have a handful of themes. We've hinted at some of these already with the critique of the prophet Nathan, with the fact of his prophetic critique, and with what's happening in the story, and the sharp censure of wise Tamar. But at this point, there's a handful of themes and literary motifs in common. So both patriarchs, that's Judah and David, preside over unruly sons who are deemed ill-equipped or unwilling to provide for the legacy of their father. Also, both men, Judah and David, respond to their sons' shortcomings with ignorance and cowardice. David is portrayed as distant or as blissfully ignorant, or even maybe as a dupe in some of the plots of his children, and Judah procrastinates. The story goes on. Another 3 months pass, and Judah learns that Tamar is pregnant. He's enraged by this, just as David was enraged to hear the story of Nathan. Tamar sends a message ahead of her to Judah. So she's on her way to see Judah, but says, you have to go tell him this first. Tell him, by the man who owns these items, Anoki Hara, I am pregnant. Anoki Hara, that's the Hebrew. Tamar's words mirror those of Bathsheba when she sends her message to the king in 2 Samuel 11, verse 5. She says it, but in reverse. She says, Hara, Anoki, I am pregnant. Means exactly the same thing. And this construction, too, importantly, I'll point out, this is the reason this is significant is because it's the only two places, again, in the Bible where you see this expression.
Interesting.
So
there's only two spots where
That's
this
it.
specific phrase is said in the entire biblical
Bible.
narrative. Wow, that's
Yes.
crazy.
Both are tales of jeopardy in preserving the family legacy. Both hinge on verboten sexual relationships, incest, fornication, assault. Many of the same terms and expressions are used in both stories. We've already highlighted two of these. In both the tale of Judah and the story of David's escape from Saul, the patriarch is said to have vayared. He went down or moved away to Adullam. As we've seen, both women who conceived, Tamar and Bathsheba, deliver the same message to the inseminator, I am pregnant. This is significant because these are the only two texts in the Hebrew Bible, as we mentioned, where the pronoun and this adjective are used like this together. Also, there's similarities in the depiction of the two Tamars. Both are assaulted by the son of the patriarch, Amnon, with his seed from Tamar, leaving her vulnerable and unprotected without progeny. I didn't actually read that part, but that's in Genesis chapter 38, verse 9. Amnon is said to have withheld his seed from Tamar. Amnon violates Tamar, right, in the succession narrative, but then also leaves her in the same precarious social position when he throws her out of his house. Both are then sent to stay in the house of their protector. Tamar is dispatched to stay as a widow in the house of her father, while the other Tamar retreats to the house of her brother, Absalom. One of the features in both stories is that both Tamars are also triumphantly vindicated. But additionally, both are vindicated at a sheep shearing. Tamar encounters Judah on his way to shear sheep with his friend Uriah, Genesis 38:10, while Tamar's brother, you'll remember, Absalom, slaughters her assailant Amnon at a sheep shearing event. So knowing what happens in the house of David from the succession narrative, it seems obvious that this story of Judah and Tamar is told as a cleverly disguised critique of whatever was going on. The connections are just too many. So how accurate is either one of these stories? Which one of these two stories? Because remember, as I pointed out, there's pretty important differences between them. But which one provides a better historical sense of the real house of David? Did he have 3 sons or 4 or more? Was Tamar his daughter or his daughter-in-law? Did David secure his line through her or through the illegitimate son of Bathsheba, Solomon, the son conceived in a lie? Look, these are all questions that I can't answer. I don't have the answers to these questions, but I think it's a good thing for everyone to think about this kind of stuff, because the prevailing point I want to leave you with in looking at this is that in Genesis 38, it seems like it may have its roots in an institutional critique. This is a story that could have been told like Nathan's story. Maybe this is a story that was in the mouth of a prophet. Was it circulated among the loyalists to the house of Saul? Was it later told by northern refugees flooding into Hezekiah's Jerusalem in the wake of the Assyrian conquest by Tiglath-Pileser and his successors, a sarcastic censure of the upstart Jerusalem king and his ambitions for the house of Yahweh. We can't know the answers to any of these questions for sure. So, like, the point I'm trying to get at here is that Genesis 38 is a clever tale, a subversive tale, a tale in which maybe there's some covering of who the actual characters are, but it's such a lame cover that it's almost on the face of it. It's almost like, yeah, we all know who we're talking about here, right? Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. But this is a story that I think maybe has its roots in what was actually going on, in these real conflicts between the Saulites and the Davidites that also actually played out in his own ranks, among his own children.
Wow. That was amazing. There was a lot there.
Yeah,
and
we've talked a while, so
we have talked a long time. But I think the reason we've talked a long time is because there's a lot here. There's so much connecting these stories.
It's and when you start to see these connections, right, I think you can't unsee them, and they just make you want to dig for more.
It makes me think about the idea of how history is always written by the winners. And so we have the Deuteronomists sort of telling of the story, and that's what's been passed down, and that's what we all know to this day. There's a story here though where we're seeing this kind of outlier, this other telling of what's going on here, and my suspicion is it's probably somewhere in the middle of these two stories, because everyone has an agenda. Everyone has a reason for writing what they're saying. And so the reason why we want to look at these stories, which ironically are both in the Bible, is to get closer to an understanding of, okay, what actually happened? What is actually going on here? What actually is happening? And so, yeah, I think there's definitely a lot of connections. And the cool thing you mentioned is the fact that there's also significant differences that might also tell us what was really going on too. So,
yeah, listen,
I
think a lot of times the temptation is just to fixate on the similarities and the overlaps, and to ignore the differences. But actual fact, we need to be looking at both and weighing them in terms of this question of what the writer is doing. They're engaging, like politics. Politics is polemics. Propaganda is about it's about writing a triumphalistic story where your guy comes out on top every time. But the ways in which you do that is to other your opponents in the first place, but other the stories they're telling too, right? Turning those on their head and reversing those stories is part of how this process works.
Yeah, I love this because, and just like any author that we've been talking about, I myself have an agenda in talking about this story.
All right.
And the agenda that I have for this is that history is very messy, and there's countless groups that are trying to lay claim to what actually happened, lay claim to truth, basically. And I think we see this time and time again, all throughout history, people who are trying to lay claim to what happened as a way of empowering their group. And so the reason I say this is because I think this is a very great segment into the topic of the documentary hypothesis. Yeah, because in the documentary hypothesis,
Yeah.
which I haven't really talked too much about with my audience, but it's basically a way of explaining how we got the first 5 books of the Bible. And it uses different sources, different groups have you, and the different sources all are trying to tell their side of the story, and what culminates is this collection of it. If correct me if I'm wrong, but is this sort of collection of it by the priestly group who seems to be
Yeah.
putting this all together?
So it seems that within the theories about the formation of the Pentateuch or the Torah, the last layer, the people who had their final fingerprints on this, seem most closely associated with the priest, what we identify as the priestly material within the sources. Traditionally, we have spoken of 4 sources: the Yahweh source, the Elohist source, the priestly source, and then the Book of Deuteronomy as its own thing, right? And there are still lots of scholars. Joel Baden, I mentioned, wrote this excellent book on David, has written another really good book on the composition of the Pentateuch, who continues to promote the 4-source theory, J, E, D, and P. I think he makes a good case for them. I am sympathetic to others who have some different ideas, right? But it's and I say this just to point out that, like, the ideas we have about the composition of the Torah, again, like, they're really messy. They're ideas that almost every scholar agrees about is that there were earlier sources behind the Pentateuch, that we can actually detect the presence of many of these early sources behind the Pentateuch, and that some of the sources at least seem to have been like their own standalone text that was then parsed out and stitched together with other things. So, I think that you would get wide scholarly agreement on those points.
I appreciate you showing us all these texts, and also walking us through the connection between these 2 specific texts, the succession narrative, and
my
as
pleasure.
well as Genesis chapter 38. You did a wonderful job. Encourage the audience, please give this man a hand clap.
Thank you.
He's been doing a great job here. So, you mentioned that you are coming out with a book.
Yeah.
Can you maybe tell the audience a little bit about that?
So, huge chunks of what I talked about today are just pulled straight out of one of the chapters in my book. I don't have a title for it yet. The working title is something like Ritual and Propaganda, the Religions of Ancient Israel, and the Construction of the Bible. We'll see. And it's basically what the book is it is based on a course that I taught for many years on the religions, on Israelite religion, but with a stronger, more historical focus as well, to the ways in which traditions in the Bible are developing relative to their history, and how the Bible is promoting, like what we did today, is promoting many of these propagandistic narratives.
Excellent. And where can people learn a little bit more about you?
Yeah, so I do most of my work on YouTube. I have a YouTube channel. It's just my name, Kipp Davis. I am trained as my primary training is as a specialist in early Judaism and the Dead Sea Scrolls, although I continue to do lots with the Hebrew Bible as well. And I am just about to start teaching Hebrew. You can find courses on Hebrew and other ancient languages available at digitalhammurabi.com. Yeah, courses, book, channel. I think that's everything.
Yeah. Yeah, well, thank you again just so much for coming on. This has been just a really great discussion. And definitely would encourage you guys checking out Dr. Kipp Davis's YouTube channel. But anyway, thank you again so much for coming on.
Absolutely.
I really appreciate it and wish you the best.
It was my pleasure, Jackson. You too.
Thank you for listening to this conversation with Professor, YouTuber, and Dead Sea Scrolls scholar, Dr. Kipp Davis. I'd like to end things out with a quote from George Orwell. "He who controls the past controls the future, and he who controls the present controls the past." All right, go, stay curious, and be blessed.